of Judge Thomas, and we'll conclude with newsmaker interviews with Senate leaders Mitchell and Dole.
Funding for the NewsHour has been provided by AT&T. AT&T has supported the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour since 1983 because quality information and quality communications is our idea of a good connection. AT&T, the right choice. And by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And by the financial support of viewers like you.
The Senate tonight confirmed Clarence Thomas to the U.S. Supreme Court. Tonight's vote came at 6 p.m. Eastern Time as scheduled. It had been delayed by 1 week to look into charges by Anita Hill that Thomas had sexually harassed her when she worked as his assistant in the early 1980s. The final vote tally was announced on the Senate floor by Vice President Dan Quayle. He had assumed his role as President of the Senate in the event his vote was needed to break a tie.
On this vote, the yeas are 52 and the nays are 48. The nomination of Clarence Thomas of Georgia to be Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court is hereby confirmed.
After that announcement, President Bush issued a statement saying he had called Thomas to congratulate him. The president said the nation and the court will benefit from having a man of principle who is sensitive to the problems and opportunities facing all Americans. We'll have full coverage of this vote right after the news summary. Charlene?
In other news, in Israel, Foreign Minister David Levy announced that his country had reached preliminary agreement with the United States on the terms of the Mideast Peace Conference. Earlier today, Baker met in Damascus with Syrian President Hafez al-Assad for more than 7 hours. Assad has already given his tentative approval for peace talks with Israel. President Bush vowed today to keep up pressure on Iraq. He did so as he welcomed the leader of Bahrain to the White House. Mr. Bush dismissed Iraq's recent statements that the Gulf War sanctions against it are threatening the lives of its citizens.
Saddam Hussein will not scorn the will of the world. Iraq must never again threaten its neighbors. We will keep the pressure on until we are satisfied that all of Saddam's weapons of mass destruction and the means to deliver them have been destroyed, until a new leadership in Iraq stands ready to live in peace with its neighbors. Your Highness, as leader of a country that knows too well what it means to be menaced by Saddam, I know you join me in looking ahead to the day Iraq closes this sad chapter in its history and joins the cause of peace.
Also today, the Bush administration said it was now willing to discuss limits on the so-called Star Wars missile defense system. U.S. arms negotiators will introduce the new position during talks with the Soviets in Geneva next week. Secretary of Defense Cheney today rejected Mikhail Gorbachev's call for a joint ban on nuclear weapons testing. He also rejected Gorbachev's call to jointly declare a no first-use policy. He said NATO must retain the option of launching a first strike against any potential enemy.
Another Yugoslav republic declared independence today. That republic was Bosnia-Herzegovina. It took the action as battles continued to rage in the neighboring Croatian Republic. In Moscow today, President Gorbachev talked with the leaders of the warring republics of Croatia and Serbia. After the meeting, the leaders agreed to start new peace talks within a month.
Ronald Coase, a professor emeritus at the University of Chicago Law School, was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics today. The 81-year-old American was cited for his pioneering work in explaining how legal rules affect the economy.
The nation's largest keeper of credit records announced it will give consumers free copies of their credit histories. TRW said it is being done in response to charges. Such records are often inaccurate. Yesterday, TRW admitted it had false tax information on some 1,500 people in New Hampshire and Vermont. IBM today reported an 85% drop in its third quarter profit and a loss for the first 9 months of the year. The world's largest computer company also said it would lay off 20,000 employees, 3,000 more than previously announced. IBM blamed weak global economies and competitive pressures for the lower results. Citicorp, the nation's largest bank today, reported an $885 million loss for the third quarter. The company also said it was suspending its common stock dividends. Bad real estate loans and a sluggish economy were cited as reasons for the bank's problems.
That's it for the news summary. Still ahead, the Senate decides on Clarence Thomas for the U.S. Supreme Court.
The Clarence Thomas confirmation story is finally over. It ended tonight when the Senate voted 52-48 to confirm Thomas as an Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Today's vote followed one of the most bitter confirmation battles in recent history. The vote was preceded by 10 hours of floor debate today, carefully measured and distributed to end precisely at 6 p.m. Here are some excerpts.
After carefully listening to both Thomas and Hill, this one member of the eventual jury of 100 feels both appear believable, but one seemingly is lying under oath, a criminal offense of perjury. Unfortunately, after the hearing, it is difficult, if not impossible, for me to determine what the facts or the truths are. There has developed in my mind no clear-cut choice, more of a mixture of concerns and doubts. How best do we conclude this whole unhappy chapter? Notwithstanding my reservations as to the nominee, I intend to vote for confirmation, but without enthusiasm. It is my hope that if confirmed, Judge Thomas will be a better justice because of this ordeal.
Judge Thomas is entitled to a presumption of innocence. Since the Judiciary Committee hearings did not overcome that presumption, that means Professor Hill's allegations cannot be used to justify a vote against Judge Thomas. A decision on this nomination cannot be made on sexual harassment grounds. Instead, it must be made on the issues that have been before the Senate for the past 100 days and more. Mr. President, I will therefore cast my vote, as I had announced on October 1st, for the confirmation of Judge Clarence Thomas.
I don't believe that any reasonable man could carefully look at that woman's face, listen to what she had to say, and set it in the whole context of the circumstances and believe that she was inventing this story. Aside from believing Anita Hill, I was offended by Judge Thomas's stonewalling the committee. He said he wanted to come back before the committee and clear his name. That's what I heard. He wanted to clear his name. He was given the opportunity to clear his name. But he didn't even listen to the principal witness, the only witness against him. He said he didn't listen to it. He was tired of lies. What kind of judicial temperament does that demonstrate? I sat there and I wondered, who's going to ask him some tough questions? Are they afraid of it? He said to Senator Metzenbaum, I believe it was, God is my judge. You're not my judge, Senator. Well, of course, God is my judge. I'm not God. But I do have a vote. And I have a responsibility to make a determination as to how I shall vote. And that kind of talk, that kind of arrogance will never get my vote.
Professor Hill was and is an attorney. She must have been well aware there was legal redress available to her if she was being harassed. Especially as an employee of the agency responsible for enforcing civil rights protection, Professor Hill must have been aware of the procedures for bringing such a charge and for keeping contemporaneous records of such treatment. Why did she not bring charges against this man if he was harassing her?
I hear and read and remember vividly the phrase that what this is all about is the lynching of an uppity black man. And this is a stereotypical attack on a black man. Well, I think that's preposterous, but if that's true, Mr. President, what are we saying about a black woman who is as well educated as the black man in question, who has a better grounding in the law as a tenured professor of the law? What are we saying to her when we all acknowledge sounds incredibly credible? If that is not stereotypical lynching of a black woman, what is?
When I face a Supreme Court nominee, I have three questions. Is he or she competent? Does she or he possess the highest personal and professional integrity? And third, will he or she protect and preserve the core constitutional values and guarantees around freedom of speech, religion, equal protection of the law, and the right of privacy? I can't tell if Judge Thomas met that criteria. His handlers and front people kept the true nature of the man from me and my colleagues. That was their strategy in the first set of hearings. But in the second set of hearings, they adopted the strategy of smash and smear to obscure the facts and attack a woman who came forward.
Throughout my years here, I have taken pride in the fact that I am a U.S. Senator, not a woman senator. When some of my male colleagues have suggested that I know nothing about national defense issues because I am a woman, I have been offended. In the same vein, I have to assume that many of my male colleagues are offended by the notion that they cannot begin to understand the seriousness of sexual harassment or the anguish of its victims. On the question before us, some women suggest that I should judge this nomination not as a senator, but as a woman, one of only two in the Senate. I reject that suggestion. The issue before me is whether, with all of the ambiguities surrounding this matter, the allegation by Professor Hill was substantiated to the point that I should change my previous view. Mr. President, I've reached the conclusion that it has not, and I therefore will vote to confirm Judge Thomas.
There are doubts about the nominee's legal experience, doubts about his legal maturity, doubts about his legal theory, and now, sadly, doubts about his character. I would ask quite sincerely, is it in the country's best interest to lay those accumulated doubts aside? My own conclusion is that it is not.
Now, it's been argued by some, principally by Judge Thomas's opponents, that as long as a shadow of doubt falls across the Supreme Court's nominee's integrity, that nominee must be rejected. But if we allow doubt itself to be sown by a single individual to be a reason for rejecting a nominee, then I think we've set in motion a process which holds the potential for undermining or destroying any nominee for any public office. And I cannot bring myself to be a party to that.
Mr. President, Clarence Thomas can survive without confirmation by the United States Senate. But if we vote against Clarence Thomas, we reward a process which is clearly wrong. And for that reason, not for the sake of Clarence Thomas, not for the sake of the Supreme Court, but for the sake of the basic American standard of decency and fairness, I ask senators to vote for the confirmation of Clarence Thomas.
And that was part of the 10-hour build-up to the vote a few moments ago. It came out in favor of Judge Thomas, 52-48, in favor of his confirmation to the U.S. Supreme Court. Gergen and Shields are here now. They are our regular analysts, of course. David Gergen, editor-at-large of U.S. News and World Report. Mark Shields, a syndicated columnist. Mark, why did it finally work for Thomas? What did it for him?
I think what worked for Clarence Thomas, quite frankly, Jim, was Saturday. I think the whole dynamic changed on Saturday, and that was when he came back and Clarence Thomas played the race card. This was a man whose nomination was based in race, and in large part, even though the president denied it right from the outset. His nomination as a black conservative had always frozen the liberal linebackers in the Senate to some degree. They had their trouble going against him. And then when he came out and in response to specific allegations said high-tech lynching, the Democrats on the committee lost not only their nerve, they lost their edge. They started, the questions to him weren't softballs, they were beach balls. He had changed the whole direction of the discussion. I thought Senator Dixon's statement was revealing how it was cast. It was not proved beyond a reasonable doubt. This wasn't a criminal trial where he was the defendant. This was, in fact, a serious charge level in a serious forum in a serious fashion. I think that's how it changed.
You agree, David?
No, not particularly. I don't think the race issue had a lot to do with this, Jim. I basically think that this was a battle fought out in the court of public opinion, just as we saw in the Bork battle, when Bob Bork lost that battle. Here, the White House nominee won the battle. I think the American people watched this and basically came down after a couple of days, Friday and Saturday. By Saturday night, it was running about 2-1 in favor of Thomas, and indeed by the end of Sunday night, it was running about 2-1 in favor of Thomas. Interestingly, the public opinion broke about the same way the undecided vote did. There were about 16 Democrats who were undecided. They broke about 2-1 for Thomas.
You don't think that's a coincidence?
No,
I mean, you do think that's a coincidence?
No, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's very related. I think, for example, had the women of this country decided that they, by a majority, felt that Anita Hill's story was much more believable, I don't think we would have seen this outcome today. Had the blacks also decided, I would certainly agree with you on that, Mark, but I think it was the women's decision that they believed Clarence Thomas over Anita Hill.
You mean the polls came out and the undecided senators read them and decided how to vote?
Well, I think that maybe putting it unfairly to the senators, but I think they're not unlike the rest of the country. They watched the evidence, they heard it, and they basically broke 2-1 the same way the country did. But I do think they were influenced by the polls. I think what you had with the undecideds was basically 16 people who were inclined to vote for Judge Thomas before these hearings were held. And they had to have something to take him off that position. You had to knock him off that position. And I don't think they heard enough. I think they broke about 2-1 the other way.
I wouldn't think that there'd be that venal or banal that senators would put their fingers in the air and wait for it. I think that there's no question, Jim, right from the outset, this was a very difficult vote for Southern Democratic senators. Senators who in fact, had most been elected, especially the senators, Terry Sanford alone of the class of '86, and Bob Graham of Florida, who was basically unopposed for re-election, Terry Sanford of North Carolina not, but the class of '86, which allowed the Democrats to regain the majority in the Senate, all of whom are up in '92, were elected with a minority of the white vote and heavy majorities of the black vote. And in fact, that was going to be a problem for them. If they were going to somehow risk their black base, Weishfowler in Georgia was in a terrible position. He's up in '92. Clarence Thomas is a Georgia native, and what was he to do? And I think they all faced that. I think they all looked down that long barrel of the political and electoral realities that they had. And I think by playing the race card, and the race card on Saturday, I think that he put it in racial terms. And the Democrats on the committee, let's be honest about it, they showed why they're not a presidential party. They didn't have the instinct to say, wait a minute, Judge Thomas, we're not talking about race. This is no high-tech lynching. This is a charge by an African-American woman against an African-American man. The Klan didn't bring this. There isn't any white citizens council that's behind this. And instead, they allowed him to make his case. I think David's absolutely right. The polls did reflect that, but they reflected because it was a non-adversarial setting on Saturday.
David, what do you make of Mark's point? And other people have made the point, too, and many of the senators confirmed it in their remarks. They essentially said, look, Senator Boom Boom, could not resolve the discrepancy between what Anita Hill said and what Clarence Thomas said. So I'm going to give Clarence Thomas the benefit of the doubt. Not that I believe him. I mean, he could very well have been lying through his teeth and committing perjury, but I can't resolve it, so I'm going to vote for him.
Well, I think we have to face one fact. There are an awful lot of folks in this country tonight who are going to be unhappy. They are terribly, terribly upset by this. They feel that Anita Hill was bullied in this process. They feel that she was treated unfairly and that this is going to discourage women from coming forward again. I hope that's not the case. I hope that we can have a healing process when this is over. I do think that the standard that was set forward by Joe Biden in the hearings, that the person who is accused deserves the benefit of the doubt, is very much in keeping with American traditions of jurisprudence, and I think was the appropriate standard in this case. And I think many senators found it the best way to think about this, given the inconclusive nature in their minds of the testimony by both sides.
And clearly the public agreed with that.
And clearly the public agreed with that.
I mean, I don't think the Supreme Court is something you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt